You don't get openly attacked. No one blames you in meetings. No email ever says, "This is your fault." And yet, pressure keeps finding you. When things become unclear, conversations drift toward you. When outcomes aren't settled, you're asked to explain, to clarify, to own the update. Nothing about your role officially changes. Your title stays the same. Sometimes your responsibilities even grow. And naturally, you start to wonder if this is happening because of you. If you think this is your fault, you'll never see what's actually going on. Before going any further, let me be very clear about something. If you're thinking this happens because you're weak, because you're too nice, because you don't push back hard enough, or because you somehow let people walk over you, that's not what this is about. You're not being targeted because you're incompetent. You're not being targeted because you're wrong. And you're not being targeted because you're a victim. This isn't about personality. It's about how systems behave under pressure. And the moment you stop blaming yourself, the real structure finally becomes visible. In most workplaces, many things happen without anyone needing bad intentions. No one has to dislike you. No one has to decide to play you. No one has to consciously choose you as a target. You're not selected by a person. You're selected by the system. And systems don't operate on emotion. They operate on pressure. Pressure, especially unresolved pressure, always has to go somewhere. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't wait. It moves. If pressure doesn't land on you, it lands on someone else. And the system knows that. When decisions are hard, when responsibility is unclear, when risk starts to surface, pressure looks for the lowest cost place to settle. Not the weakest person, the least disruptive position. The place where pressure can land without creating noise, without escalation, without forcing the system to reorganize itself. Once pressure finds a place where it disappears quietly, it keeps returning. This is why capable people experience this more than incapable ones. Pressure doesn't look for weakness. It looks for stability. It looks for people who can handle things, people who stay calm, people who fix problems without making everything shake. The ones who say, "I'll take care of it." The ones who smooth things over. The ones who keep things moving. Those qualities aren't flaws, they're strengths. But inside a strange system, they turn you into something else. They turn you into a buffer, a place where unresolved pressure can be absorbed without consequence. That's why this doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because you're reliable. And tolerance plays a much bigger role here than most people realize. At work, tolerance isn't interpreted as kindness. It's interpreted as capacity. Every time you absorb ambiguity for someone else, every time you take on extra responsibility to keep things smooth, every time you let something slide to avoid friction, the system learns something. It learns that pressure can be placed here, not because anyone is tracking you personally, but because the pattern keeps working. When something works, systems reuse it. Silence is part of this too. Silence doesn't pause dynamics. It stabilizes them. At work, silence isn't neutral. It becomes precedent. When a boundary is crossed and nothing happens, that moment doesn't vanish. It becomes the new baseline. And baselines are powerful because they remove the need to renegotiate. In corporate environments, silence isn't professionalism. It's how dysfunction becomes acceptable. Another shift usually happens quietly before people realize what's going on. Access moves before responsibility does. You're no longer involved early. You stop being consulted. Decisions arrive already made. No announcement, no explanation. Then later, responsibility shows up. You're asked to explain outcomes, to manage consequences, to absorb the fallout. You weren't part of shaping the decision, but you're expected to carry its weight. You weren't stripped of authority. You were removed from the process before you noticed. This doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because responsibility absorbs risk better than authority does. And systems prefer risk to be absorbed quietly. This is why the experience feels so personal. You're the one carrying it. You're the one feeling the pressure. So your brain concludes, it must be me. But the mechanism isn't personal. It doesn't follow personality traits. It follows position. Especially positions that connect teams, translate ambiguity, and keep things functioning when clarity is missing. Those roles are essential, and they're vulnerable. Not because of who you are, but because of where you're standing. No one is attacking you. You're not being sabotaged. You're standing in the exact place where pressure is easiest to drop. And as long as pressure disappears when it reaches you, it will keep coming. Not out of cruelty, out of efficiency. Now here's the part most people don't expect. There are people who step out of this pattern without confrontation, without drama, without changing who they are. They don't become harder. They don't become colder. They don't start fighting. They simply stop being a place where pressure can hide. The first thing they stop doing is absorbing ambiguity for others. When expectations aren't clear, they don't rush to fill the gap. They don't guess. They don't quietly fix it just to be helpful. They allow uncertainty to remain visible. The second thing they stop doing is explaining decisions they didn't make. They don't cover for unclear choices. They don't translate chaos into coherence for someone else. They stay factual. They describe what happened without justifying it. And the third shift is subtle. They stop absorbing pressure instantly. They slow their responses just enough that structure has to show itself. Pressure only disappears when someone absorbs it. If no one does, it has to travel back toward its source. Nothing explodes when this happens. No one apologizes. No one admits fault. But pressure stops landing there. Not because someone decided to stop, but because it no longer vanishes. The system adjusts itself. That's the real goal here. Not becoming tougher. Not being more respected. Not proving anything. The goal is to stop standing in the place where the system benefits from your silence. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop occupying the position the system is quietly using. You were never being targeted because you were weak. You were being relied on because you were convenient. And once you step out of that role, the game changes. Even if nothing on the surface looks different. Pressure never disappears, it just moves.